The Silent Meridian. The Silent Meridian. Part 3. Echoes across the Channel. The January night ferry wallowed through Channel swells like an iron leviathan. Spray rattled the porthole of the cramped first-class cabin, where Sherlock Holmes stood silhouetted, his long coat brushing bunk edge as the rhythmic throb of engines timed his thoughts. Beside a valise of analytical reagents lay a freshly sharpened rapier Kinesider-dress sword masquerading as walking aid, should continental intrigues grow less polite than those of British mystery circles. Dr. John Watson, bracing against the roll, reviewed the telegrams that had summoned them abroad. Parisian gendarmes reported a midnight carillon at the Gare de l'Horloge, striking 11:13 times before plunging into silence. In Vienna, the great Pommerian bell answered with 11 mournful booms at noon. The pattern was unmistakable dry time symbolism in mystery, spreading like an epidemic across Europe's metropoles. Watson tucked the sheets away. "You suspect Thorne's disciples coordinate these peals?" "Undoubtedly," Holmes murmured, eyes on the Black Sea. Professor Thorne's resonance blueprint survived his arrested and hidden truths, and conspiracies rarely perish with one apostle. He turned, the lamplight cutting angles across his aquiline features. "Our first stop, Paris. The Ministry of Posts may deny sabotage, but the Fraternité du Cadran Brisé, broken dial brotherhoodas, left its calling card. At dawn, Calais clocks chimed correctly jaw of fragile reassurance. The night ferry express steamed toward Paris beneath pewter skies, and Holmes, ever the scholar of Victorian suspense, sketched a timeline across his notebook margin. Friday. 2. 11 a.m. Broken dial pulse detected. Gare de l'Horloge, Paris. Friday, 12. 0 p.m. Pommerian miss, strike, Vienna. Friday, 8. 14 p.m. Trieste Harbour Light reported harmonic stutter. 11-hour intervals, he noted. The conductor marches west to east like sunrise yet, chooses the 11th hour in each zone. Watson shivered despite the carriage stove. In the lexicon of Gothic detective story melodrama, this felt like a ritual crossing of thresholds, one bell tower at a time. Arrival beneath the iron web. Paris received them with greasy snow and the hiss of steam escaping the Gare du Nord canopy. Inspector Élodie Marchand of the Sûreté awaited tall, gloved, a woman whose kepi perched on ebony hair like an afterthought. "Monsieur Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, trench coat sweeping marble. "My superiors offer thanks and a headache. The press already calls last night l'heure 11 crave explanation." Holmes inclined his head. "We crave access signals, office, bell, relay, and any confiscated device." Marchand's motorcar coughed across boulevards to the Ministry of Posts on Rue de Grenelle. There, amid humming dynamos, an engineer displayed the culprit, a brass induction coil shaped as an 8-pointed star serpent, eating hourglass at centre-wired, to the master relay that commanded every civic clock south of the Seine. "Same craftsmanship as London's phantom resonator," Holmes observed, fingertip tracing a soda bead. "But see here, Watson. French makers mark F. Laforge, Rue Saint-Martin. Our adversary hires local artisans when convenient." Inspector Marchand sighed. "Laforge disappeared 3 days ago. His workshop ransacked. Kidnapped or complicit," Holmes mused. "Either way, his trail is warm. Gaslamp mystery seldom allows artisans to linger. Rue St. Martin shadows." Twilight bled lavender over Haussmann facades as they reached the coppersmith's shuttered atelier. Inside, dust danced in slanted light from a broken skylight. Chemical odors of flux and burnt lacquer hung in the air. Watson's boot crunched glass. Holmes raised a hand, pointing to a chalk outline on the workbench. Concentric circles labelled with Roman numerals and lunar symbols. Jazzing nerves thrummed through him. Here lay the score the Brotherhood followed. Upon closer inspection, a corner bore English notes. Vienna receiver calibrated. Trieste beacon primed. Await, freight manifest. La Dame des Ombres sails 1 Feb carry pendule éclipsée to Alexandria. Watson blinked. Egypt? The conspiracy widens. Aristocratic secrets rarely respected frontiers. Now the affair threatened to become a global historical thriller. Holmes pocketed the chalk diagram. The Dame des Ombres departs in 6 nights. Before then, we silence Vienna Brick, the harmonic chain. Marchand's team dusted for prints, while Holmes inspected a fallen wall calendar. A smear of verdigris pointed to today's date, circled twice, annotated 12EH, Cimetière des Innocents. Midnight rendezvous, Holmes surmised. At the old catacombs entrance beneath Innocent Square, the Brotherhood thirsts for symbolism bones and bells align. Watson's pulse quickened. Then tonight, we descend again into underworlds. Holmes allowed a thin smile. A mystery thriller audiobook demands nothing less. Midnight in the ossuary. Paris slept fitfully under low clouds when Holmes, Watson, and Marchand slipped through a disused sewer hatch off Boulevard Sebastopol. Below, the catacombs breathed cold limestone damp. Ossuary wall-sartful parterres of femurs and grinning skulls reflected lantern glow. Drips echoed like slow metronomes. Deep within, a vaulted gallery opened around a Roman-era shrine. Here, 6 cloaked figures encircled a bronze tripod supporting a crystal tuner. One recited in Latin, voice resonating, "Ad undecimam horam convertitur ordo." Holmes signalled. Police torches flared. Revolvers glinted. "Sûreté! N'interrompez pas!" Chaos erupted. Cloaks scattered. A shot rang, ricocheting off skull rows. Watson tackled a fleeing acolyte. Marchand wrestled another. Holmes sprang for the crystal device, dragging it clear of wiring. A cloaked woman eyes violet. Arabella's French counterpart slashed at him with a bell. Hammersmith's chisel. He parried with a rapier. Cane flicking steel to spark. The device toppled, shattering. Harmonic whine died. Cloaked conspirators froze, momentum lost. Police irons clanged. Holmes, breathing hard, examined a fallen parchment. A map of Stephansdom, Vienna, annotated with coil placement, and Die Stunde 11, the 11th hour. He straightened, gaze flinty. "Paris coil neutralized," he said, handing it to Marchand. "But Vienna strikes tomorrow at noon Central European time. Holmes and Watson will be aboard the Orient Express by sunrise." Marchand saluted. "Bon courage, messieurs. Europe's clocks depend on you." Down lamplit corridors of the Gare de l'Est, the early Orient Express hissed like a caged dragon. Sherlock Holmes stepped onto the sleeping car platform at 5:25. Dr. Watson close behind, boots ringing frost-rimmed boards. Baggage steward stowed a single leather trunk marked SH, containing reagents, violin, and the bronze catacomb tuner shards material proof of a hidden truths and conspiracies network metastasizing across Europe. As the whistle shrieked, Inspector Elodie Marchand handed Watson a slim dossier through the window. "Passenger list first, class only. Compare faces. Bon chance." The train lurched east, gaslights trembling. Among velvet curtains and secret passengers. Holmes scanned the manifest. "Note these 3, he told Watson, pointing his fountain pen. "Count Istvan Szegedy, Austro-Hungarian military attaché. Boarded, Calais. Madame Violetta Dupré, Parisian mezzo-soprano, compartment 7. Professor Lucius Heilig, German acoustician, travelling to Vienna for instrument research." "Any could front for the Brotherhood," Holmes said. "But Professor Heilig sounds suspiciously close to Thorne's academic circle." They made a quiet patrol. Crystal sconces glowed, painting the mahogany panelling of the corridor in warm sepia. Soft snores drifted from curtained bunks, mingling with the iron rhythm beneath. In the dining saloon, Count Szegedy sat alone, moustache immaculate, reading La Revue Militaire. He acknowledged Watson with a curt nod. No sign of covert agenda, but unmistakable secrets of the upper-class auteur. Madame Dupré's door bore a violet silk ribbon, and the faint perfume of orris root nothing more sinister than theatrical vanity. Heilig's compartment, however, exuded an odour of ozone and wax. Holmes knelt, examined the lock. Faint scratches, tail, copper filings. He withdrew a pick set, popped the latch. Inside, shelves of tuning forks and a compact Ruhmkorff coil rested in velvet recesses. On the berth, a wooden case shaped like a metronome, but bearing the serpent hourglass crest. Holmes lifted the lid. Nested within foam lay a miniature induction resonator, range perhaps 2 kilometers enough to feed rogue pulses to Vienna's civic bell line from any high vantage. Footsteps echoed. Heilig himself appeared short, pince, near pinched on a sharp nose, beard trimmed to anxious points. His eyes darted to the open case, then to Holmes. "Guten Morgen, Herr Professor." Holmes greeted in flawless Hochdeutsch. "You tour with intriguing luggage." Heilig's hand shot for a spring baton, but Watson's Webley gleamed. The acoustician froze. Holmes gestured to the device. "Contraband under international telegraph statutes. You'll spend the remainder of the journey locked in the guard's van." Heilig's shoulders slumped, yet a thin smile crept over his lips. "Too late, Englander. The choir has many voices. Vienna's Pummerin will preach at noon regardless." Holmes pocketed the resonator diode. "We shall see whose sermon carries furthest." Snow. Sabotage. A bridge at the 11th hour. Dawn found the express arrowing across the Rhine into Baden, furs draped in ghost white. At 11. 3. As the train rattled onto the old stone viaduct of Hellenthal, a deafening boom split the alpine silence far ahead. A charge tore rails from sleepers. The locomotive screeched. Sparks fountained. Carriages lurched, grinding to a sickening halt inches from the gap where track yawned into abyss. Chaos erupted. Passengers cried out, porcelain shattered. Holmes steadied a dazed Watson. "Dynamite on a timer set before we left Paris," he deduced, scanning plumes of smoke across the gorge. "Someone aboard signaled detonation the moment we passed the last tunnel." Count Segedy appeared, revolver drawn. "My men can protect passengers," he barked in accented English. 2 aides in hussar coats clambered from the next car, rifles at ready. The Count's competence soothed nerves, yet Holmes eyed him warily. Sabotage could still suit an Austro-Hungarian hawk wishing to foster panic. Engineer reports revealed the severed track ended mere feet from a maintenance spur. Another locomotive waited, steam already up. On its tender sat a tarpaulin-covered crate, marked scientific apparatus. Madame Dupre materialized, cloak billowing violet ribbon at her throat. Holmes whispered to Watson. Observe Dupre and Segedy exchange glances laden with clandestine accord. Indeed, the soprano nodded subtly as the Count ordered baggage transferred to the spare engine. Holmes slipped among porters, slashed the tarpaulin with his penknife. Beneath lay a brass cylinder identical to Heilig's device but tenfold larger, its terminals wired to a galvanic pillion industrial resonance cannon, set to piggyback on Vienna's telegraph cable, once connected at the next junction. A stenciled label read, Project Mitternacht, Elf Pommerscher Work. Watson's breath hissed. They intended the rail delay so this engine could detach. Race ahead. Deploy the cannon before we reach Vienna. Holmes replaced the tarpaulin, heart pounding. Victorian suspense now rode the rails. The phantom engine chase. Snow began to swirl as Count Segedy ordered engineer Ruprecht to steam ahead. For inspection! With mad acceleration, the spare locomotive thundered off, Madame Dupre aboard. Holmes seized control car levers in the stalled express, shouting to crew, Reverse! We must follow using alternate track across the Oberwald loop. Under his fierce authority, workers threw switches. The Orient Express crept back, then forward along the bypass line. For 90 breathless minutes, they shadowed the rogue engine's plume through pine valleys. Telegraphed warnings flashed east. Detain Black 4. 6, 0, no. 2,437 at next station. Yet the saboteurs braked not for any flag. Holmes, pacing the driving deck like a caged hawk, calculated. Oberstein cutting right-hand curve bank, grade 1 in 40. They must slow by law. There we board her. Watson paled but nodded. He readied grapples and the Browning. Steam roared, whistles shrieked, and at 12, 1, the 11th hour. By Vienna's time, Holmes and Watson leapt from caboose roof to tender of the saboteur engine, boots skidding on icy coal. Count Segedy spun, sabre flashing. Dupré clutched a Mauser. Watson's pistol cracked, shattering the Mauser barrel. Segedy lunged. Holmes parried with rapier, cane. Steel rang. Sparks cascaded. Below, wheels screamed along iron. Holmes feinted, disarmed the Count, then tapped hilt to his temple. Segedy sagged. Dupré hissed a French oath, but Watson levelled the Browning point. Blank. "Quarter rests with you, madame. Stand down." She dropped, defeat graceful as her stage bows. Engineers, wide-eyed, surrendered. Holmes clambered to the cab, slammed brakes. The loco grated to a halt meters before a signal box where gendarmes already waved rifles. Race against noon bells. By telegraph relays, the Austrian police learned to expect the British detective. An hour later delayed, but triumphant, the Orient Express steamed into Vienna Westbahnhof. Newsboys hawked sheets about London's clock detective, yet Pummerin still threatened to miss. Strike at 3 p.m. Imperial time. In the cathedral square, snowflakes whirled around scaffolding where technicians worked to electrify the ancient bell. Professor Heilig's accomplice, a Jesuit clockmaker named Franz Verlhard, disappeared at dawn, carrying copper coils. Holmes scanned rooftops. Heilig's larger cannon remained intact aboard the loco, he told Inspector Karl Auerbach. But Verl likely smuggled a portable resonator up the tower. They ascended 343 spiral stairs to the belfry. There, among oak beams thick as oaks, Verl knelt affixing coil clamps to the great bell's crown. Hearing footsteps, he whirled, brandishing a hammer. Holmes advanced. "The 11th hour fails here, Herr Verl. Your conductor lies in irons. Strike noon in peace." Verl's eyes were fervent. "Our Heimat wird erwachen, homeland will awaken. Monarchs chain us to archaic hours." He swung, but Watson blocked with rifle stock. Hammer clanged to stone. Holmes' ripped coil leads free. The Pummerin boomed once, resonating pure and slower note of warning rather than dread. Auerbach cuffed the zealot. Outside, the noon cannon fired on the Hofburg bastion. Church bells across Vienna answered correctly 12 honest strokes. For the moment, time symbolism in mystery favoured order. Secrets unpacked in a café. As flurries danced against Café Central's tall windows, Holmes, Watson, and Auerbach examined confiscated documents. Among scoresheets and cryptograms was a letterhead. Compagnia del Quadrante, Trieste, Servizio Mediterraneo. It bore shipping codes and a date. 3 February Zes, Helios outbound to Alexandria. Watson exhaled. First La Dame des Ombres, now Helios. The pattern extends South Egyptian Meridian next. Holmes tapped the table. Observe the Brotherhood spiral. London, Paris, Vienna, Trieste, Alexandria, tracing ancient Prime Meridians from Greenwich towards the cradle of longitude studies at Alexandria's lost Pharos. They intend an ultimate demonstration where science was born. Auerbach frowned. Kaiserliche Marine would assist. Holmes shook his head. Diplomatic delays. Better 2 travellers without flags. He sipped Viennese melange, eyes thoughtful. Watson? Part 3's midpoint leads to the Adriatic. We board the night mail south to Trieste. He sprinkled ground cacao across the froth, forming a figure Ouroboros symbol severed with a knife edge. Let us cut the serpent again. Adriatic dusk, the Lion of St. Mark. The South Railway swept them across frozen Styrian valleys to the blue dusk of Trieste, city of multilingual murmurs and warehouses heavy with spices. On the Molo San Carlo lighthouse, Holmes noted telegraph wires newly strung to a bronze prismanother harmonic node. They hurried to the harbour master. The Helios, a steam packet flying Greek colours, would sail at dawn. Night wind tasted of salt and political tension. In a trattoria near Piazza Grande, they found smugglers boasting of a clock of storms loaded aboard Helios, bound not merely for Alexandria, but through the Corinth Canal, first intended for display at a pan-Hellenic exhibition. Holmes bribed them for layout sketches. Device lashed to forward hold, under guard of men with serpent tattoos. We shall board as postal inspectors. Holmes decided. Once at sea, disable the clock of storms, before it whispers 11 across the Levant. Storm on the Gulf of Trieste. Pre-dawn drizzle cloaked the loading quay. Disguised in peacoats and peaked caps, Holmes and Watson presented forged Mediterranean postal passes. The quartermaster waved them below decks. In hold 2, a crate the size of a carriage hummed faintly. Holmes cracked seals. Inside loomed a resonator tall as a man, crowned by an astrolabe dial time, longitude, and lunar phase in one. The brass plate read, Pendule éclipsée, Maison Dupré, Thorn, No. 2. Watson's jaw tightened. Dupre's family firm she was daughter, not diva. Footsteps approached guards. Holmes whispered, Set delay charges 5 minutes then to the lifeboats. They rigged dynamite from locomotive stores, slipped topside as sky-lightened pewter. But on deck stood Madame Violetta Dupré herself, Mauser replaced, now holding a beretta. Behind her, Count Segedi escaped, en route gripped a sabre. Crewmen bristled with carbines. Holmes raised palms. Your clock will never reach Alexandria. Dupre's eyes blazed. Then it will drown with you, monsieur, and history shall remember the Empire's finest drowned by its own arrogance. She gestured. Guards advanced. 4, 5 paces. Suddenly a roar shook the hull, dynamite below. Deck plates heaved, cries rang. Dupré staggered, Segedi cursed. Watson tackled the Count. Blade flashed, but Holmes's cane struck wrist. Sabre clattered. Bilge flames licked hatch seams. Dupré, spitting fury, leapt across debris toward the afterdeck lifeboat. Holmes shouted, Sauve qui peut! Crew scattered for pumps. In the confusion, Holmes and Watson slashed free a gig, swung it over davits into the water. Waves slapped icy brine. They tumbled aboard as another explosion ripped hold 2, flinging crates skyward like dice. Helios listed, fires hissing beneath spray. From a distance, the lighthouse's beam blinked calm, ignorant of fiery convulsions. Holmes rowed until safe, then stopped, breath-fogging. Watson turned. Dupré? Holmes shook his head. Flames devoured the steam packets midships. Silhouettes scrambled into water. Whether Madame Dupré lived or perished, her resonator sank. Holmes murmured a line of Greek. Time is the wisest counsellor. Then he faced Watson. But we have not yet counselled Alexandria. An uneasy sunrise. Rescued by harbour police, they stood once more upon the Molo San Carlo. Holmes gazed east where salmon light burned above the sea. Part 3 converges upon Egypt, he said. If a final resonator exists, it will greet the sun at the ancient meridian of Ferris. We must outrun it. Watson, weary yet resolute, consulted a steamer timetable. The P, O Arcadia, departs tonight fastest to Port Said. Holmes's eyes flashed. Then secure passage. The Brotherhood plays its last note before the Sphinx. He stepped toward the telegraph office to wire Inspector Marchand, Auerbach, and Mycroft. Vienna secure. Trieste device destroyed. Pursuing final node Alexandria. He paused, pen hovering, then added, Tell London, the 11th hour sweeps east with dawn. Keep every bell true. Outside, the waterfront clock chimed 8 even strokes pure, uncorrupted. A small victory, yet across continents, gears still whirred in shadow. The great detective flexed fingers aching from rail fights and swordplay, kissed the bruise tenderly with a wry smile. Come, Watson, he said, voice steady despite fatigue. Egypt beckons. And with it, perhaps the deepest note of this vast, Gothic detective story. The P, O Arcadia, slipped from Trieste under an opaline moon, her twin funnels exhaling coal smoke that mingled with the briny dark. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, officially shipping ledger auditors, watched the Adriatic coast recede until lighthouse sparks became glowworms on a velvet ribbon. The detective's gaze, however, focused on the quarterdeck, where sailors installed a fresh Marconi wireless set modern sinew through which the Fraternité du Cadran Brisé might pulse new mischief. Below in their two-berth stateroom, Holmes unfurled a chart. Pencil strokes linked Greenwich, Paris, Vienna, Trieste, the line bending southeast to Alexandria, seat of the vanished Pharos. "Longitude 0 once began here, Watson," he said. "If the Brotherhood ends its ritual at that archaic meridian, symbolism will eclipse practicality. They mean to crown their creed where scientific time first merited empire." Watson nodded, scribbling keywords for a future mystery thriller audiobook chapter: Alexandrian Meridian, Gaslamp Mystery, Aristocratic Secrets Go Oriental, A Suspicious Manifest, The Passenger in White. Next morning, the purser, a jovial Glaswegian named Bremner, welcomed them to inspect cargo ledgers. Amid cotton bales, locomotive crankpins, and barrels of Smyrna figs, one entry seized Holmes's eye. Item No. Description: Origin consignee. 572B, Astronomical Exhibit, Boxed, Trieste C. Leone, Alexandria Observatory. Holmes tapped the line. Leone means Lion Venetian code name we glimpsed on Dupre's sinking Helios invoice. Bremner scratched his head. Box sits midships hold. Big brute. Weighed in at 1,200 weight. They descended to the hold. A teak crate, side stenciled Meridiana stellata, handle as glass, rested beneath nets. Holmes ran a blade round the lid seam and lifted a slat. Nestled in straw lay a drum of phosphor-bronze gearing, entwined with quartz rods, and a battery pack stamped Dupre Thorn MK3. Watson exhaled. The final resonator. Holmes replaced the slat, eyes narrowing. We dare not destroy it at sea risk of structural blast. Instead, we mark it for seizure in Egyptian customs. Yet the Brotherhood doubtless travels with us to safeguard delivery. Indeed, that evening a new passenger dined at the captain's table. A tall figure in immaculate white suit and Panama hat, silver snake, head cane resting against his knee. Introduced as Senor Carlos Leone, Chilean cosmographer en route to survey the Nile Delta, he spoke flawless French, Italian, and a slightly archaic English. During dessert he quoted Herodotus on the gift of the river, then praised the late Professor Thorne's audacious harmonics. Holmes's eyebrow twitched. Below decks, wireless sparks crackled. The Marconi operator later confessed to Watson that Senor Leone had sent a coded burst to Alexandria. Pendule éclipsé à bord. Préparez la tour d'Aboukir pour l'heure 11. Red Sea stratagem. 3 days later, Arcadia cleared the Suez Canal and nosed into the Red Sea. Holmes convened a council in the purser's pantry attendees. Bremner, the first officer, and Watson. Over maps they forged a plan. Wireless faint. Holmes would transmit a counterfeit Brotherhood code ordering the resonator crate rerouted from Alexandria dock to the quarantine jetty, buying hours of confusion. Customs intercept. Bremner would arrange for the consignment to be randomly selected for fumigation, whereupon Egyptian police, pre-alerted by telegraph to Mycroft's contact in Cairo, could impound it. Shadow Leone. Watson to tail the man in white the moment gangways drop, tracking him to any secondary device or faction commanders. At 2, 7 Holmes tapped the false message. 20 minutes later, the operator reported a furious reply from Alexandria. Instruction countermanded deliver directly Abu Qir Tower. The bait had taken. Arrival beneath the lighthouse ghost. Sunrise painted Alexandria harbour rose gold, when Arcadia eased past Fort Kitebaith, the very promontory where Pharos once blazed. On the breakwater, a squat watchtower bristled with modern aerials. Abu Qir optical, time beacon. Leone, cane gleaming, paced the foredeck with feline impatience. But stevedores, following Bremner's orders, craned his crate onto a barge flagged quarantine service. Leone protested in 4 languages. The officer shrugged, citing fumigation statutes. Leone hailed a shore launch and rocketed toward the quarantine pier. Watson followed in a hired felucca, native skipper grinning behind his shisha pipe. Holmes remained aboard, scanning harbour traffic with binoculars. Tucked behind a freighter funnel, he saw the glint of a coil array already installed atop Abu Qir Tower 2, small to be Dupre's beast, yet potent enough to trigger every muezzin loudspeaker and church bell in Alexandria. A chase. Through classical ruins. Watson's felucca beached on a spit of sand near the quarantine sheds. Leonie's launch already moored there. Inside, 2 Egyptian port guards lay stunned. Watson dashed among stacked crates, Webley drawn. Leonie re-emerged, hauling the resonator's power coil in his armskein now, a sword stick unsheathed at his belt. A pursuit ensued across the ruins of ancient warehouses. Leone vaulted fallen columns, robes snapping like sails, eyes alight with apocalyptic zeal. He reached catacomb steps descending beneath the lighthouse foundations. Watson paused, chest-heaving, then followed into echoing gloom. Oil lamp glow ahead revealed a vast vaulted chamber where Ptolemaic mosaics met British telegraph cables. Leone clamped the coil onto terminals set into a granite plinth. The array hummed alive. Sparrows roosting in crevices fled, shrieking. "Too late, Doctor." Leone laughed, voice echoing. "When my watch strikes 11, Greenwich, minarets, and monasteries alike will hearken to liberation." Watson levelled his pistol. "Step back!" Leone flicked his swordstick steel-kissed Webley barrel, knocking it aside. They grappled. Watson's revolver skittered into darkness. The coil crackled, violet arcs crawling along mosaics. Leone thrust. Watson parried with torch. Shaft, but the blade nicked his arm. Pain seared. Still he lunged, driving Leone against a switchboard. Tubes shattered, showering sparks. The zealot cried out as current lashed his shoulder. From above, a thunderous clang reverberated the lighthouse bell. Silent for centuries, rang 11 hollow tones, the resonance net alive. Watson staggered. Leone exulted despite burnt flesh. At that instant Holmes burst down the stair, rapier cane flashing. 2 quick beats disarmed Leone, 3rd beat slashed coil leads. A roar of arcing copper filled the chamber, energy shorted to earth. The bell stuttered, coughed, then fell silent. Leone sank to knees, defeated. Holmes bound him with telegraph cord, eyes ice bright. "Time, Signor?" "Remains crownless." Coda on the Corniche. That evening, crimson twilight bathed Alexandria. Egyptian authorities carted away the disassembled pendule éclipsée. Minarets resumed rightful call to prayer at sunset, not the 11th hour. In the terrace café of the Cecil Hotel, Holmes and Watson nursed cardamom coffee. Sea breeze rattled palm fronds like faint applause. Paris coils smashed, Vienna foiled, Trieste sunk, Alexandria seized. Watson enumerated, sling on arm. "Have we finally silenced the Brotherhood?" Holmes twirled his cup. "We lopped branches. The root hides perhaps in hidden libraries of Toledo, or Templar crypts in Lisbon. Though their grand design failed, fragments may tempt new zeal." He breathed the salt air. "But for now, the world's clocks tick true." He unfolded a cable just received from Mycroft. "European synchronization stable. Bells, normal. Governments grateful. Return when able." Holmes smiled. "Able, my brother says, never aware that ability is a currency we spend too freely." Watson clinked his glass. "To ability, then, and to the elusive peace between ticks of history. Far offshore, waves murmured against invisible reefs. Nature's own pendulum, timeless and ungovernable. Yet under gas lamps along the Corniche, pocket watches chimed 8 precisely. In that fragile concord between man-made gears and Earth's rotation, Part 3 came to rest, its echoes fading into tranquil night. Part 4. The Silent Meridian. A low fog clung to the Thames embankment as the P.O. Arcadia docked at Tilbury, her hull still bearing scorch marks from Trieste. Sherlock Holmes stood at the rail, eyes fixed on the diffused glow upriver where London's skyline blurred into spectral silhouettes. After weeks of continental pursuit, he was home, yet his features betrayed no comfortingly the austere focus that had guided every step of this sprawling historical thriller. Dr. John Watson, arm still in sling, joined him. "The Brotherhood lies in irons from Paris to Alexandria. Surely England can breathe again." Holmes inhaled the river's brackish air. "Perhaps until the next pendulum swings. Time symbolism in mystery reminds us that silence at noon may mask a ticking in shadows." At Gravesend Jetty an enclosed brougham awaited, chartered by Mycroft Holmes. Inside, a sealed dispatch bore the crest of the Royal Observatory, Greenwich. Holmes read it once, then twice, brow furrowing. S.H. Urgent. Harrison chronometer H4, missing from display vault. Guard found drugged, no visible intrusion. Greenwich time ball failed to drop on 31 Jan at 13. 0. Public blames mechanical fault. Internal suspicion. Acquisitive collector. I suspect darker motive. A clock too perfect to steal merely for gold. M.H. Watson exhaled. H for the marine time, peace that conquered longitude. If secrets of the upper class covered prestige, any magnet might. Holmes cut in softly. Or a clandestine circle could weaponize its myth. Recall the pendule eclipse. Symbolism trumping explosive yield. Harrison's masterpiece is a crown jewel of British mystery culture. Its abduction at the 11th hour of our return is no coincidence. Night at the observatory. Midnight lamps flickered across Greenwich Hill as Holmes and Watson followed Superintendent Sarah Grange through the Flamsteed corridors. The display vault's door, a 6-inch steel slab, showed no mark. Inside, velvet cushions gaped where H4 once nestled beneath crystal. Nearby hung a brass plaque quoting George III. A timepiece fit to rule the waves. Holmes's magnifier hovered over the pedestal. No scratches, no fibres lifted with jeweller's gloves. Note, however, this trace of powdered shellac. A clock, case restorer's trade. He knelt, sniffed. Mixed with benzoin used by East End horology shops. Grange supplied a staff ledger. Only 3 keepers held the vault key, all accounted for, each found unconscious in separate quarter-schloroform inhalation within a 10-minute window. Watson frowned. Multiple simultaneous attacks discipline reminiscent of Thorne's cells. Holmes nodded. Yet the brotherhood abroad is shattered. A new conductor? Or a hidden British chapter we overlooked? He plucked a sliver of glass from the floor frosted, beveled. Watch. Crystal. Older cut. Possibly Georgian. He pocketed it. Doctor, tomorrow we trawl London's horological underbelly. Mark it under the viaduct. Dawn found the pair in Spitalfields, where a Saturday clock market sprawled beneath railway arches. Stalls overflowed with carriage clocks, fusee pocket watches, forgotten regulator d'Alsa, an entire bazaar of ticking memories. Smoke from paraffin lamps mingled with the tang of solder. Holmes moved like a hound on scent, interrogating dealers with crisp politeness. One, a scar-cheeked veteran named Old Joe Keane, admitted he had been offered a box of marine guts, fine as crown jewels, by a gentleman in an ivory scarf. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Did he leave a calling card? Keane produced a stiff rectangle embossed only with a single symbol, a small astrolabe superimposed upon a coiled serpentouroboros within compass rose. Watson felt a chill. Another sigillia different from the Brotherhood's hourglass. Holmes studied it. An inner sect? Or a rival order claiming older lineage astronomers rather than bell ringers? He flipped the card. Faint pencil scratched a meeting place. Aeon Club, Pall Mall, 3 Feb, 9p, Hem. Holmes slipped the card into his pocketbook. Tonight, Watson, we shall enter a new ring of this Gothic detective story. The Aeon Club. Pall Mall glittered under gas lamps as snow flurried. The Aeon Club, facade of sober Portland stone, bore no sign. Holmes presented the Ouroboros card at the door. Liveried footmen ushered them into a lounge of rosewood shelves, celestial globes, and a central orrery turning in candlelight. Members conversed in hushed tones. Clergy, astronomers, East India retirees, a Russian prince. At 9, precisely a bell, Chibnot 11 and a silver-haired gentleman mounted a dais. His voice, though soft, commanded the room. Brethren of the silent meridian, he began. 2 nights hence, the world shall observe the greatest temporal eclipse since Harrison's day. When the Greenwich time ball fails again, our new Prime Meridian shall rise. Holmes and Watson exchanged glances. The speaker continued. Our agent now perfects H4's resonance within the palm house at Q-glass ribs, ideal for harmonic broadcast. On 4 February at dawn, Britain's maritime chronometers will drift. Admiralty will capitulate to our recalibration. Watson's fingers twitched toward his revolver, but Holmes pressed his arm patience. The meeting ended. Members dispersed to card rooms. Holmes approached a side table of pamphlets. One bore the motto, Tempus Regnum Mutat, Time Changes Empire. Beneath, diagrams of the Q-palm house wired with induction coils like ivy. He pocketed the leaflet, then guided Watson silently to the cloak hall. Outside, atop cab step, Holmes whispered, "A splinter! Or to call them the Meridianite attempt to supplant Greenwich itself. Tonight we alert Q Constabulary. Tomorrow, before dawn, we infiltrate the glass house." Watson nodded, heart thudding. "The Brotherhood mutates like a hydra." Holmes's eyes glinted. "Then we sever its head at the 11th hour again." Night mist sparkled over the Thames as the hansom cab rattled across Hammersmith Bridge, bound for Kew Gardens. Gas lamps threw shifting halos through the leafless boughs, turning the deserted road into a tunnel of ghostly vapour. Sherlock Holmes sat silently at the window, turning the Tempus Regnum Mutat leaflet he had collected at the Aeon Club. Dr. Watson, revolver hidden beneath his cloak and his wounded arm still bandaged, braced himself against the jolting floorboards. "An alarm has already reached the Kew wardens," Holmes said in a low voice. "But I fear they do not grasp the scale. The giant palm house is a cathedral of glass, and wrought iron on its ribs will magnify the Harrison H4's field, like the soundboard of a cello." Watson pictured the vaulted house acting as an immense aerial. "If they trigger it at 6 in the morning, every coastal signal station in Britain will drift out of step. Precisely, and 6 o'clock. Greenwich is the 11th hour at their silent meridian, 11 in Lisbon, 1 in Alexandroupolia harmonic chain, across half the globe." Holmes's smile was thin. "But their clock will soon meet a very exacting watchmaker. Figures among the palms. 4:35. A service gate at Kew creaked open. A supervisor ushered 2 railway engineers. Inside papers drafted by Mycroft and sealed by the Board of Trade. Yellow hurricane lamps flickered in the damp air. Far ahead, the glass dome of the palm house glowed like a crystal arc. Within, humid darkness smelled of tropical earth. Through overlapping palm fronds, Holmes glimpsed blue sparks arcing. At the centre, where a fountain normally stood, a tall wooden platform supported H4 in a gilded cradle, wires spiralling up to the iron roof beams. Beneath the platform, 4 robed figures monastic black-chanted. Their leader was the silver-haired man from the Aeon Club, Lord Magnus Ashcroft. His voice rang like a litany. "When H4 stops by our hand, Greenwich will fall silent. When its seconds beat again, a new meridian shall rise." Holmes whispered, "Ashcroft the Whitcombe ally we thought reformed. He's founded a sect of his own. Watson loosened a morphia syringe last resort if wounds grew dire. Before they could close in, Ashcroft threw a knife switch. The iron lattice quivered with a deep vong, as if a giant harp string had been plucked. H4's second hand froze. Holmes darted forward, slipping between cycads. A monk wheeled, swinging an electrified baton. Watson fired. The discharge bowl shattered, killing the current. Darkness swallowed the house, broken only by the groan of metal. Ashcroft drew a derringer and pressed it to the chronometer. "A step closer, and Harrison's legacy is scrap." "Legacy?" Holmes answered, voice echoing. "You call coercion a legacy? You forget the lesson of Carrion Moor." "Carrion Moor proved the old bell had lost its sting," Ashcroft sneered, and pulled the trigger click. A misfire. Holmes had earlier oiled the cartridges at the club. Ashcroft froze. Watson surged forward, knocking him to the plinth. The gun splashed into the fountain basin. 2 monks lunged for a backup switch. Holmes's rigger's knife severed the main cable. Sparks spat. The induction field collapsed. H4's hand ticked, then resumed perfect motion at 4:59, its escapement chattering like a cricket. Red signal flares burst outside. The wardens had arrived. Ashcroft struggled in Watson's grip, laugh rasping. "You can't kill time. Holmes said only slumbers. Perhaps, Holmes replied, lowering H4 into a padded case. But tonight it will sleep in a steel vault, not in the hands of a somnambulist. Greenwich at dawn. 7:0. Pale sunlight streamed over Crystal Palace. H4 lay once more inside its Greenwich steel. Safe. The time ball would drop at 13. 0 to the very second. The newspapers would call yesterday's failure a momentary relay fault. No hint of the battle amid palm fronds and copper coils. In the octagonal library, Mycroft Holmes ended a telephone call with the Prime Minister. The Aeon Club is cleared 23 arrests, 6 devices seized. You now owe the Exchequer a holiday. Sherlock brushed dust from his lapel. Keep it for the day the Meridian tries trading places with the moon. He turned to Watson. We still have 6,000 words to close Part 4 in your manuscript. Perhaps the rest can take place during a seaside retreat at Brighton? Watson smiled and noted, Part 4 ends with a flawless dawn-yet. The reflection of the chronometer's hand in Holmes's eyes still trembles, eager to tick into an unsettled future. Holmes's promise of a quiet seaside recovery dissolved before Watson could book railway tickets. At 10 o'clock that same morning, a telegram stamped Old Bailey Urgent arrived from Inspector Lestrade. Trial of captive Meridianites fixed for 6 Feb. Crown Prosecutor requests. Holmes, Watson, evidence in camera. Judge. Fears public outcry. If details leak, please attend High Court, 1 hour prior for security briefing. Watson laid the flimsy on the breakfast tray. So much for Brighton. Holmes set down the Times. One last cog to slot into place, my dear fellow. When zealots stand in the dock, their allies tend to rattle gates outside. The Courtroom of Shadows. 6 February. A hard rain drummed on the dome of the Central Criminal Court. Reporters huddled beneath umbrellas, prevented from entry by a cordon of constables. Inside, the wood-panelled Court 2 had been cleared of public spectators. At the bar, Lord Magnus Ashcroft, the white-suited Senor Carlos Leone, Count Segedy, Madame Dupre, Professor Heilig, and the remaining Meridianites faced Mr. Justice Huxleyer, man whose ascetic profile suggested scales of iron rather than blindfolded justice. Holmes gave concise testimony. Theft of Harrison H4, induction coils at Q, attempted resonance broadcast. Watson described Trieste's locomotive chase and the coil duel under the Abu Qir lighthouse. The defendants, represented by the flamboyant Sir Rufus Varden, wove a defence of scientific protest and symbolic sabotage, denying intent to injure life. Varden rested on the absence of fatalities, calling the plot a philosophical demonstration. In the hushed gallery stood Lady Eleanor Pembroke, Sir Percival Whitcombe, and Viscount Ashbury Living, reminders that the conspiracy's roots reached into respectable drawing-rooms. Lady Pembroke met Holmes's gaze with a grateful nod. Her family feud was buried, but a cousin had sprouted fresh poison. At 3 p.m. the jury retired. Holmes murmured to Watson, "Observe Ashcroft's composure too serene for a man whose freedom balances on a knife edge. I fear contingency." Barely half an hour later, a court usher stumbled in, face bloodless. "The jurors all 11 have fallen ill. Gas seeped into the retiring room chloroform mixed with phosphorus." Lestrade swore. Guards rushed the dock, but Ashcroft only smiled. "Without a jury," he said softly, "no verdict stands. Time, Mr. Holmes, is ever my advocate." Yet Justice Huxley hammered the bench. "Defendants will be remanded, pending impanelment of a fresh jury. This court will not be held hostage to gimmickry." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "They expected rescue, not remand. Check every exit." Even as he spoke, a dull boom reverberated somewhere in the vaulted cellarage. Smoke rolled up the staircase. Pandemonium erupted. Constables hustled judges toward an emergency egress. Ashcroft and his cohort ducked behind the dock's swinging gate, but Holmes vaulted the rail, cornering them against oak panelling. "Stand away," Dupre hissed, producing a slender glass ampule. "Hydrogen cyanide you strike? We all breathe doom." Watson froze. Lestrade aimed revolver but dared not fire. Through choking smoke, a fire warden's gong clanged. The defendants backed toward a service door now ajar-engineered, no doubt, by an accomplice below stairs. Holmes lowered his cane, voice level. "Consider, madame, break that ampule here, and your order dies with U-time itself unaffected." Ashcroft's answer was a curt nod to Leone. The Chilean flicked a hidden lever. A floor panel slid the escape hatch obscured by the jury box carpet. Down stone steps, they vanished. By the time Holmes and Lestrade reached the cellar corridor, the fugitives had commandeered a coal chute leading into Newgate's old Catacombs of Warren predating the court. Smoke from a phosphorus pot masked their trail. Holmes knelt, fingertips grazing powder soot. "They head south toward the Fleet Tunnel. We'll need fresh air and Metropolitan Police maps." The ghost platforms of Holborn Viaduct. Midnight drenched London in sleet. Guided by an antiquated drainage chart, Holmes and Watson crept along disused platforms beneath Holborn Viaduct's station-brick arches echoing with distant train clatter. Lantern light glinted off rails where no carriage had run since '78. At a spur switch the fugitives had left evidence. Wax seal of the serpent, astrolabe, broken, and wheel ruts of a hand-pushed trolley. Iron grooves led into the Snow Hill Tunnel, long abandoned save for telegraph ducts. Sudden vibrations shuddered the ground far ahead. A generator coughed alive, bathing the tunnel mouth in sickly electric blue. Holmes quickened his pace. "They mean to unleash a resonance signal through London's very bones-brickened iron of the subterranean." Smoke stung their eyes. In a cavern once used as a telegraph exchange, Ashcroft's party had set the stolen coils against a wall of cast-iron girders. H4, its case pried open, ticked in the center of a spiderweb of cables. A dynamo, jury-rigged to an overhead traction line, whined up to speed. Leone's voice rose in fevered cadence. "When the city beneath London hears the time that never was, surface clocks shall bow." Count Sigurdy cranked a field coil. Blue corona danced on metal ribs. Holmes stepped forward into the glare. "Ashcroft, Harrison's masterpiece cannot be coerced. Its bimetallic balance will shear under your over-frequency, and every soul in this tunnel will cook in vaporized oil." "Sacrifice accepted," Ashcroft replied, eyes shining. He gestured to Dupré again. She held a cyanide ampoule, but now wired to a break-glass relay on the generator. Panic-lengthened shadows across brickwork. Watson, calculating angles, whispered, "If I shoot the relay housing." Holmes shook his head a fraction. Too risky. Instead, he raised his voice, addressing Ashcroft. "Your sect recites astronomy but forgets thermodynamics. These girders anchor under Holborn Viaduct's 70,000 tons. Your harmonic burst will not change the meridian. It will crumble this roof, burying your new kingdom." Madame Dupré blinked fear flickered. Segedy hesitated at his crank. Holmes saw doubt bloom. Then Watson played the card of empathy. "Count Sigurdio Hussars routed at Sarajevo because clocks Feleddo, you truly wish to loose worse chaos upon civilians." Segedy's knuckles whitened on the crank, then released. The generator pitch sagged. Heilig's hand hovered in confusion. Leone shouted curses in Spanish. Dupré's resolve shattered. She flung the ampule aside unbroken. Ashcroft's dream cracked like blown glass. Holmes lunged, severing the main lead with his blade. Sparks roared. H4's escapement spun free than jammed, but safe. Lestrade's squad, following chalk arrows Holmes had left in soot, stormed in. In seconds, shackles clicked. Holmes cradled the chronometer, oil splattered yet intact. "Time, gentlemen," he said softly, "remains the quiet sovereign." Epilogue of Part 4, 8 February. The Central Criminal Court reopened under heavy guard. With their escape foiled, the Meridianites faced swift judgment. The jury, this time quartered in an iron-barred chamber, returned guilty, verdicts on charges of high treason and conspiracy to endanger life. Lord Ashcroft, unrepentant, cited Copernicus. "The earth moves, yet you jail me." Mr. Justice Huxley replied, "So be it. You shall move no more." That evening, at 221B Baker Street, Watson, penned the final paragraphs of Part 4. Outside, St. Mary Le Bone's bell pealed 9 honest strokes. The city's heartbeat felt steadier. Snow flurries softened the lamps. Holmes, pipe glowing, studied the repaired H4 returned on loan for him to regulate overnight. Even perfection drifts, Watson. Harrison allowed 1 second's error in 100 days. Still, it edges off unless corrected. So too civilization. A perpetual need for tiny, exacting adjustments. Watson wrote the closing sentence. Thus ended the Meridian War, proving once again that a single vigilant mind may keep the compass of empire true provided another vigilant mind records the hour. Holmes glanced over his shoulder and nodded approval. File that under the silent Meridian. We shall let Part 5 wait until spring. For the first time in many nights, the two friends allowed the sitting-room clock to tick undisturbed and, under its patient cadence, drifted into untroubled silence. Part 5. The Unwritten Hour. February 28th, 1896. A late winter gale whipped sleet across the Southampton docks as crates bearing the royal cipher were swung aboard the armoured cruiser HMS Dauntless. Inside one oak chest, swaddled in oiled silk, lay the Harrison H4 chronometer, its tour of embassies cancelled after the silent Meridian affair. A marine guard sealed the lid. Unaware, a pair of grey-gloved hands watched from a warehouse gantry. 200 yards away, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson sheltered beneath an iron awning, overcoats flapping. Their seaside respite had lasted precisely 9 days before Mycroft's urgent note arrived. Intelligence indicates a final, unidentified cell armed with technical plans stolen from the astronomer Royal's study intercept before they strike during H4's sea transfer to Malta. Code name: Project Caligula. Holmes's gaze tracked the gantry silhouette. There is our watcher, Doctor. Note the stance knees flexed like a gymnast, not a docker. Watson followed the line of sight, just as the figure leapt, swung down a cargo net, and vanished behind bales of wool. A faint steam whistle sounded. The dock shunter had uncoupled a single covered wagon and was rolling it toward a siding labelled No 5 Graveyard Spur, out of service. Graveyard Spur, Holmes repeated. Appropriate. Let us follow quickly and quietly. Freight. In the fog. A dense industrial mist muffled the clank of couplers. At the end of the spur, an abandoned engine shed yawned like a cavern. Inside, hurricane lamps revealed 4 men in dockers' garment. Their speech was Oxbridge crisp. At their feet stood an iron cylinder the size of a coffin, stamped Caligula Mark I, Meridian override prototype. On a trestle table nearby lay blueprints bearing the crest of the Royal Observatory, annotated Oscillator Delta E, Range 1 Hemisphere. Holmes whispered. So the silent Meridian splinter planned a maritime test using Dauntless as carrier. Sink the cruiser? No, Caligula aims to flood the ship's gyro compasses with spurious beats, rendering the Mediterranean squadron blind. A muffled thud behind them. The watcher from the gantry had circled and closed the shed doors. She stepped into lamplight, a woman of perhaps 30, wearing a storm cloak and motor goggles. Holmes stared. Miss Clara Whitcombe. Sir Percival's scholarly daughter, who had helped destroy the carrion pendulum, responded with a rueful half-smile. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, England still turns. Yet men in clubs keep plotting. I infiltrated this cell a month ago. They call themselves the Epact Circle. Why not alert Scotland Yard? Watson asked. Because the Circle count yard inspectors among their patrons. Tonight they move Caligula from rail to a pilot cutter. You two are the only swords I trust. Holmes detected truth in her weary eyes. Then let us break the blade before it leaves the scabbard. A clockwork ambush. Inside the shed, the conspirators argued over ignition timing. Holmes signalled. Watson cut power to the lone work. Lamp, plunging the hall into shadow. Clara lobbed a magnesium flare-white glare, stunned the men. Holmes rushed the nearest, disarming a Webley. Watson's slinged arm protested, yet he felled another with a shoulder. Check. but the Lidera red-haired lieutenant in Naval Reserve uniformly yanked a ripcord on the cylinder. Gears spun. A dull hum rose. "Caligula armed!" he shouted, sprinting for a personnel hatch at the rear. Holmes pursued through catwalk rafters. Steam hissed from burst pipes. The hum deepened to bowl, turning vibration. Clara knelt at the cylinder's control panel. "Fail, safe in Latin," she muttered. "Vis inertiae vincit momentum wins." Watson scanned dials. "Frequency climbs to 800 chimes a minute. At resonance, it will shred H4's balance staff even at this distance." "Unless we stall the flywheel," Clara said, gripping a spanner. Sparks flew as she jammed the cogs, metal screamed. The hum faltered, fell. Holmes dragged the red-haired lieutenant back, binding wrists with loading rope. "Your impacts miscalculate, sir. The calendar of sabotage ends tonight." A message, etched in brass. With Caligula safe, harbour police secured the shed. Clara produced a brass tag pried from the device's housing, an engraving of a trident bisecting an Ouroboros. Holmes frowned. "We have not seen that emblem." "Nor I," Clara said, "until the Circle's last council. Their whispers spoke of a final patron beyond even Ashcroft, someone they call Aurelius, a financier who walks between meridians the way others cross streets." Holmes's eyes sharpened. Perhaps Part 5's true adversary. Watson exhaled. "Then Malta convoy is spared, yet another puppeteer hides. Where do we search?" Holmes turned the brass tag under lamplight. Micro-etched coordinates glinted. 40 degrees Nilth, 19 degrees E, he murmured. "The Strait of Otranto, southern Adriatic. In antiquity, Roman fleets called those waters Fretum Aurelium, Aurelius." Watson managed a bitter laugh. "Back to the continent we go." Holmes pocketed the tag. "Yesone. Last voyage to the Meridian. No map records." He faced Clara Whitcombe. "Will you join the chase?" She steadied her glasses. "After what Ashcroft cost my lineage, I see the game to the end." Holmes extended his hand. "Then to Otranto, Miss Whitcombe. The unwritten hour approaches." The March equinox approached as the mail steamer SS Apollonia ploughed southeastward across the Ionian Sea. Its destination was the anchorage at Otranto, the narrow throat where the Adriatic and Mediterranean trade winds meet. On the quarterdeck, Sherlock Holmes paced in long strides, trenchcoat snapping like a pennant. Dr. John Watson, his arm finally free of its sling, leaned on the rail beside Clara Whitcombe, the Whitcombe archivist turned reluctant agent. "Our brass tag's coordinates fall a league seaward of the town," Holmes said, producing his pocket sextant. "Likely a vessel or a cliffside redoubt something Aurelius can abandon at a moment's notice." Clara studied the oily horizon. The E-packed circle spoke of a horizon machine. Not a bell, not a pendulum, but a beacon to write its own meridian by light. Watson raised an eyebrow. "A meridian by light? That suggests a heliograph tower, a lighthouse." Holmes nodded. "Precisely. The decommissioned Capo d'Otranto light lies idle since the new iron tower was built. It sits at 40 degrees Nilth, 19 degrees E to within minutes. Let us assume Aurelius has rekindled that prism for darker purpose. Capo d'Otranto. Nightfall found the Apollonia anchored offshore. A fishing cake hired under false names bore the trio, and a local pilot threw silvered swells toward the headland. The old lighthouse rose like a gaunt obelisk, lens long removed, lantern room boarded. Yet as they neared, an uncanny white pulse blinked once, twice 11 flashes in total, then vanished. Watson hissed, "The 11th hour again." Holmes's voice was a quiet rasp. "A navigational code. 11 short. 1 long the letter A in Morse. Aurelius, signing his initial." They beached in a shingle cove. The pilot, prudent, retreated with his boat until signalled. Holmes, Watson, and Clara climbed goat paths between boulders glazed by moon-bleached lichens. A mistral rattled sere grasses. Somewhere a church bell tolled one. Near the base of the tower, a ragged breach yawned where bricks had been prized away. Fresh mortar crumbs lay at the edge. Recent entry. Inside, spiral stairs groaned beneath their boot. Heels. Halfway up, Holmes froze, sniffing the air. Ozona dynamo's running. Lantern light glimmered above. Holmes motioned silence, then mounted the final steps in a swift surge. 3 armed men in sailors' reefer coats staffed a humming apparatus, a parabolic mirror, banked arc, lamps, and at its heart a nickel gearbox the size of a hat, Caligula Mark II. At the workbench stood a figure in dove-grey tailoring, silver beard neatly trimmed. Aurelius. He regarded the intruders with mild curiosity. "Mr. Holmes, I was told you correct the world's clocks. Good tonight, one drifts too far east." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Your plot died at Kew and Holborn." Aurelius smiled. "Plots, perhaps. Principles never. The Greenwich monopoly shackles navigation. I simply offer traders a new Prime Meridian mine. Observe." He flicked a lever. The arc lamps blazed. Through slats in the boarded lantern room a razor, bright shaft, lanced the night, fixed due north, south by gyroscopic mount. Telegraph relays chattered. The gearbox began ticking a counterfeit of H4's escapement, broadcasting beats via optical shutter into the beam. Aurelius spread his arms. "Every wireless station that sights that beam resets chronometers to A time Aurelius time. Commerce will follow." Watson drew his Webley. Sailor guards raised rifles, but Clara stepped forward. "Meridian after meridian you place sovereign over science. Yet science does not bend to vanity." Aurelius regarded her. "Miss Whitcombe, your family once kept the West Quay. Join me? Curate the new chronicle." She shook her head. "I curate truth, not hubris." And with that she hurled a flash. Lamp. Glass shattered on the shutter mechanism. The beam jerked, spraying wild arcs across the sea. Holmes sprang. Watson fired twice, disarming a guard. Steel flashed in close quarters. Holmes's cane rapier parried a cutlass butt, then drove the attacker against a bulkhead. Sparks showered from shorting leads as Clara ripped out a switchboard fuse. Aurelius snatched a derringer, but Watson's third shot shattered its barrel. The financier staggered back, face lit by strobing light. Holmes seized the crank of Caligula II and slammed it to 0. Gears screeched, seized, then snapped. The arc lamps guttered to darkness. For a few heartbeats, only surf and ragged breathing filled the void. Then distant church bells tricase. Corfu, perhaps even Dubrovnik rang their scheduled hours, oblivious to the failed rebellion. The ledger closes. Italian carabinieri arrived by torpedo launch at dawn, led by a Maltese Royal Navy liaison already alerted by Holmes's coded flash from the lantern balcony. Aurelius and his men were ferried away in irons, the beam dismantled for Admiralty science to study and to lock away. On the return cake, Clara watched the lighthouse recede into morning haze. "Latitude, longitude lines on paper until men decide they are chains. Will this ever end?" Holmes wrapped his Inverness cape tighter. "Innovation begets zeal. Zeal dresses as righteousness. Our task is not to end it, Miss Whitcombe, only to keep the mechanism honest." He turned to Watson with a rare glimmer of warmth. "And to record each adjustment, lest the next keeper forget where the balance wheel should rest." Watson smiled, touched notebook to breast pocket. The unwritten hour now duly written. Seagulls wheeled above as the sun cleared the horizon, gilding the sea with a new meridian of molten golden aligned to any empire, yet visible to all who cared to look. The RMS Britannia delivered Holmes, Watson, and Clara Whitcombe to the Pool of London on the damp morning of 17 March 1896. Rumours of a Mediterranean time pirate had already reached Fleet Street. The press clamoured for details, sensing the makings of another Victorian suspense sensation. 1. A quiet cabinet at Whitehall. 2 hours after disembarkation, the trio were ushered into a panelled committee room where Mycroft Holmes, Lord Salisbury, and the First Sea Lord awaited. The ministers listened in stunned silence, as Holmes outlined Project Caligula, the Otranto beacon, and the financier Aurelius, whose passport now proved him to be Sir Adrian Merivale, heir to a Midlands iron fortune, and intimate of half the secrets of the upper class. "Gentlemen," Holmes concluded, Merivale exploited national pride in Greenwich to build a rival Prime Meridian, first by bell, then by beam. His scheme is broken, but the technical blueprints still exist. Lock them deeper than the crown jewels. The Sea Lord nodded grimly, and signed an order consigning the Caligula plans to the Admiralty's sealed vaults at Portsmouth. No release for 100 years. 2. The Old Bailey Second Session. On 24 March, a packed courtroom buzzed as Merivale, Count Segedy, Professor Heilig, and Madame Dupré were arraigned for high treason and conspiracy to endanger life. This time the gallery remained open. Reporters sketched furiously, transforming the dock into a living Gothic detective story tableau. Holmes's testimony, delivered with his usual icy precision, dismantled Sir Rufus Varden's defence of scientific altruism. Watson, arm-heeled, described the tunnel battle beneath Holborn and the lighthouse duel at Otranto. Clara Whitcombe, her voice unwavering, produced ledger pages from the epacked circumeticulous schedules of bell tower attacks, cross-referenced to stock market shorts. Hidden truths and conspiracies reduced to double-entry bookkeeping. After only 40 minutes, the jury returned unanimous guilty verdicts. Lord Chief Justice Huxley pronounced sentence, transportation for life to the new imperial penal colony on Ascension Island remote, enough that no meridian mattered. 3. 221B, the last adjustment. Night settled over Baker Street. Even the cabbies loitering by the Marylebone cab rank spoke of nothing but Merivale's madness. In the sitting-room, Holmes fine-tuned Harrison's H4 one final time before it travelled to permanent display in the Royal Maritime Museum. Perfection, he murmured, noting the beat against his tuning fork. Perfection with a price, Watson replied, tapping the Times leader calling for stricter control of dangerous chronometric research. Holmes exhaled blue pipe smoke. Governments will always fear what they do not understand. Our task, my dear doctor, is to keep fear from becoming a clockwork of oppression. Clara Whitcombe entered, clutching a small Morocco case. I found this among Merivale's effects. She opened it to reveal a miniature astrolabe fashioned partly from silver, partly from the melted fragments of the silent Meridian's stolen keys. Watson frowned. A trophy? Holmes shook his head. A reminder. As long as artifacts carry mythic weight, someone will try to twist them. Seal it. In the British Museum Reserve collections let scholars, not zealots, debate its lore. Clara smiled faintly. Then my curatorial career may finally resume Sal's revolvers. She thanked them, descending the stairs into a soft London drizzle. 4. Epilogue. The clock that sleeps. At the mantel, Big Ben's distant chime drifted through the fog-12 clear strokes. The 11th hour had not returned. Holmes filled 2 glasses of Greek mastic from a bottle salvaged aboard Apollonia. To longitude, he toasted. To latitude, Watson replied. And to the small, steady tick that keeps them honest, Holmes finished. Outside, the city's innumerable dials railway indicators, factory buzzers, nursery clocks beat in imperfect unison, a vast orchestra still needing its unseen conductor. Yet tonight, after 5 relentless parts of detective fiction and relentless British mystery, the maestro allowed himself a pause. Holmes set H4 inside its travelling crate. Tomorrow a constable escorts this to Greenwich, he said, snapping the latches. Let us hope it stays there until the century turns. Watson closed his notebook, realizing the ledger of this mystery thriller audiobook had reached its natural cadence. The lamplight flickered, catching motes of dust that drifted like frozen seconds. For once, the silence felt comfortable unwritten, but perfectly on time.